My name is Olivia Morgan. I'm 42 years old. I learned how cleanly love can be weaponized on a Tuesday morning in a Denver courthouse, when my sister took the witness stand in my ex-husband's custody hearing and began to take me apart, piece by careful piece. Your Honor, my sister has always been unstable. Chloe said it like she was reading a diagnosis from a file. She folded her hands on the rail, chin lifted a half-inch too high, the way she did when she believed she was the only adult in the room. I didn't feel rage. Rage would have been a mercy. It was the familiar, exhausted ache of watching a story you didn't author being told as if it were the only version that ever existed. The courtroom smelled faintly of furniture polish and old paper. The hum of the fluorescent lights pressed down on everything, on the rows of spectators, on the carved seal above the bench, on the tired faces of clerks who had heard worse things said more loudly. Judge Evelyn Reed sat forward just enough to convey attention and nothing else. A neutral gaze. A practiced stillness. I had been on panels with her at professional conferences. We had once exchanged notes about a mutual friend's retirement. None of that existed in this room. It shouldn't have. She drifts from one thing to the next, Chloe went on, smooth and patient. She disappears for days at a time. She says it's work, but she never tells us what she does. She's been in therapy for years, off and on. I have had to step in with my nephew more times than I can count. Do you believe your sister can provide a stable home for her son? Asked Ethan's lawyer, a lean man with a slick tie and a voice selling confidence by the ounce. Chloe didn't hesitate. No. I don't. From the gallery, Liam's gaze found mine. 9 years old, dark eyes. He sat between Ethan's mother, who had never liked me but had been cordial for most of our marriage, and a bailiff who had guided him to his seat when the testimony began to curdle. He looked scared, but he didn't look away. He never looked away when he was trying to understand something important. That was mine in him, the wanting to know. Ethan sat across the aisle at his table, back straight, hands folded over a legal pad like a student who had studied just enough to be dangerous. He wasn't gloating. Not openly. He wore the alert, contained expression of a man who had been told to let the process work. Every few minutes his lawyer would lean in and whisper. Every few minutes Ethan would nod. She lives in a tiny apartment downtown, Chloe continued, the rhythm of her voice settling into the groove she had carved. She drives a car that's practically antique. She says she's fine, but everything about her life looks precarious. My nephew deserves better. Thank you, Ms. Parker, the lawyer said. No further questions. My sister stepped down. She didn't glance at me. I wondered if she had practiced that part in the mirror, the clean exit, the refusal to be rattled by the woman she was describing as a hazard. The attorney turned his attention to the bench. Your Honor, the child has a father with a stable job, a mortgage in a safe neighborhood, a support network ready to help. We're asking for full legal and physical custody for Mr. Morgan and supervised visitation for Ms. Morgan until she can demonstrate stability. Judge Reed's gaze slid to me. Ms. Morgan, she said, voice even, you will have an opportunity to respond. Do you wish to ask any questions of the witness? No, Your Honor, I said. My voice sounded calmer than I felt. It always did when I had already done the math. In the fields where I worked, you learn to love timing. Not drama, timing. Drama makes noise. Timing makes outcomes. For years I had been paid to notice when the room was ready, when the variables were aligned, when the risk of saying nothing was greater than the risk of saying the thing that changed everything. That instinct was a living animal in me now, quiet and awake. Ethan's attorney called 2 more witnesses, Ethan's supervisor, who verified his schedule and salary, and a neighbor, who spoke warmly about block parties and the cul-de-sac where kids rode bikes until dinner. They were polite, reassuring, thoughtfully mundane. The argument wrote itself, stable father versus mysterious mother. When it was my turn, I stood. Your Honor, I said, I'd like to call a witness. Ethan's attorney was on his feet before the second word finished. Objection. There was no notice of any defense witness. The witness confirmed availability this morning, I said. If the court permits, I believe his testimony will resolve the most troubling allegations. Judge Reed considered that for a beat that felt like a minute. I will allow it, she said. Call your witness. I nodded to the bailiff, who opened the heavy doors. The courtroom turned, as courtrooms do when anything interrupts routine, the collective impulse to witness whatever is about to make the boring day memorable. He entered with easy precision, a tall man in his late 60s, the silver of his hair a mirror for the shine of the insignia on his uniform. The ribbons over his heart were a silent resume that made several people sit straighter without knowing why. He didn't scan the room. He didn't perform. He just walked forward with the steady weight of someone who had spent a lifetime being asked to stand where the air was thinner. Please state your name and occupation for the record, the clerk said after swearing him in. Major General David Lang, he replied, voice resonant without effort. Commandant, United States Air Force Academy. Chloe's head snapped toward me, the mask cracking wide enough for the whole court to see. Curiosity, then confusion, then horror chased each other across her face. Ethan's lawyer blinked like a man struck by his own trap snapping shut. For the first time all morning, it wasn't me on trial. It was them. General Lang, I said, do you know me? Yes, he said. I do. How? Ms. Morgan serves as senior counsel to the Office of Special Programs for the United States Air Force, he said. She has been assigned as lead legal advisor on several sensitive matters involving air and space operations and national security. Her record is exemplary. It is possible to hear silence. It makes a rounded shape in a room, sudden and complete. You can feel the breath people hold, the eyes that sharpen, the posture that adjusts toward attention. Without discussing classified operations, I said, can you briefly describe the demands of such a role? Long hours, he said, irregular schedules. Travel on short notice. Strict compartmentalization. Minimal ability to discuss work outside cleared channels. Extensive background checks. Ongoing psychological evaluations to monitor the effects of operational stress. It is difficult work. We trust very few people to do it. Ms. Morgan is one of them. I let that settle. The courtroom is a living thing, it metabolizes information. Give it too much at once and it chokes. Give it what it needs and the shape of the day changes by degrees you can measure. General, I said, counsel for the petitioner and my sister have expressed concern about my financial stability. Can you speak to that without disclosing any protected information? He nodded. Ms. Morgan's salary is public in broad terms, as are the standards we use for clearance and continuing employment. She is compensated at the SES equivalent level, receives federal benefits, and must file annual financial disclosures. She owns her residence. She passes every audit. What about the allegation that I disappear? I asked. That is a mischaracterization, he said. Ms. Morgan's schedule is sometimes classified. She is subject to sequestration during certain proceedings and prohibited from outside communication. That is not disappearing. That is performing her duties. Thank you, General, I said softly. Ethan's lawyer clawed for an objection, but the only thing left on his table was the wreckage of his own case. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, and... Judge Reed lifted a hand. You may cross-examine, Mr. Vance. He did. He asked if my work had ever compromised my ability to parent. The general declined to answer anything calling for speculation and stuck to what he could verify. He spoke of my punctuality for the mandatory events that parents attend at base schools when we host community outreach, which made a few heads tilt in surprise. He spoke of me leaving a meeting because Liam was sick. When Mr. Vance sat down, the general stayed seated, hands easy on the rail, profile cut from something older than law. Your witness may step down, Judge Reed said. Your Honor, I said, with the court's permission, I have a few documents to enter into the record. I passed copies to the clerk, the custody evaluation from Dr. Angela Chen, court-appointed child psychologist, letters from my supervisors, written in the bland, specific cadence of official correspondence, redacted performance reviews, heavy with black lines and light with praise that fit between them. Judge Reed glanced through Dr. Chen's report first. Her eyebrows made a small motion that people who testify often never see. This evaluation describes you as an exemplary parent, she said. It notes strong attachment, consistent routines, clear communication, and stable housing. It recommends that the child remain in your primary care. Yes, Your Honor. I didn't look at Chloe. In our family, bleeding where someone could see you was considered indecent. You stitched yourself up in silence and offered an explanation only once the scars had already set. Ms. Morgan, Judge Reed said, you are not required to respond to personal allegations. But if you wish to address your family's lack of knowledge of your employment, you may do so now. I had rehearsed the words in my head and hated every version. There are speeches that are stairs and speeches that are ledges. This one was a bridge built over a place I had not wanted to show anyone. When my clearance was finalized, I said, I signed a set of agreements that changed the shape of my life. It wasn't just about not telling secrets. It was about learning to live around the spaces where the secrets live. My family is not cleared. That isn't a judgment, it's a boundary. I don't tell them things because I can't. I didn't tell them about the work because protecting it, and protecting the people it protects, requires silence. I swallowed. It felt like washing a knife and not cutting yourself. I have been in therapy because my job asks me to see and hold difficult things. Therapy helps me do my work better and come home as the mother my son deserves. I have missed some school plays. I have also spent nights on the floor beside his bed, counting breaths through a fever, and mornings making dinosaur pancakes when the thermometer went back to normal. My work is not a hole in my life. It is one of the beams that holds the roof up. The other beams have names. One of them is Liam. A murmur passed, soft as a breeze through paper. Ms. Morgan, Judge Reed said, do you have anything further? Yes. I turned, finally, to my sister. Chloe, I said, and her name surprised me in my own mouth, how brittle and careful it sounded there. There are things you said today that you could have asked me about at any time over the last 10 years. You chose not to. You decided what was true, and then you behaved as if your version of me owed you proof you never bothered to ask for. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed the truth. And now the truth has turned on you. Her eyes glistened, then cooled. She lifted a shoulder a fraction, as if to set down a weight she had only just noticed herself carrying. I faced the bench again. Your Honor, I am requesting primary physical and legal custody, with standard visitation for the father once he completes the recommended co-parenting courses. If the court orders supervision in the interim, I will comply. I also request that extended family be excluded from further proceedings unless the court finds their testimony necessary. Today has illustrated the harm of speculation masquerading as concern. Mr. Vance stood, protested gently that this was all theater. Judge Reed's expression did not alter. The court will take a brief recess, she said. The gavel sound was a quick, precise note. Everyone stood because the room told us to. On the bench, Judge Reed returned. The room stood and sat in the ritual that makes strangers into a system. I pressed my fingertips against the edge of the table, the cool wood grounding me in the only part of the world that mattered. In the matter of Morgan versus Morgan, she began, having considered the testimony, the documentary evidence, and the recommendation of the court-appointed evaluator, the court finds that it is in the best interests of the child to remain primarily with the respondent, Ms. Morgan. The petitioner will have supervised visitation for the next 6 months, to be re-evaluated upon completion of co-parenting classes as recommended. The court further orders both parties to refrain from involving extended family in ongoing legal proceedings absent a specific, demonstrated need. There is a difference between relief and victory. Relief is a weight coming off your sternum. Victory is oxygen in the blood. I felt both, in alternating currents. Liam ran. A bailiff half-stepped forward and then half-stepped back when he saw where the child was going. My son hit my waist with both arms, a soft thud, the kind that leaves a bruise and a blessing. He tilted his face up. "Mom," he whispered. "Are you a spy?" A laugh rose in my chest and turned into a breath. "No, baby," I said. "I'm a lawyer. For the Air Force. I help make sure people follow rules that keep other people safe." He thought about that, the way he always did, chewing on the shape of it. "So, like catching bad guys with paper?" "Sometimes," I said. "Sometimes like protecting good guys with it." His smile was quick and bright and private. "I like paper," he said. "It makes airplanes." "Mine don't fly very well," I admitted. "I'll teach you," he said, with the arrogant kindness of 9-year-olds. We walked out into the corridor together. The hallway's echoing air felt like a different weather system. I could feel Chloe behind us before she spoke. "Old families have gravity, you learn to sense mass long before collision." "Olivia," she said. I turned. The courthouse lights bleached her, leaving only a pale outline of the woman I knew. "I didn't know," she said. "I truly didn't. If I had known." "You couldn't have known," I said. "That's part of it. I thought you were shutting me out." "I was," I said. "But not the way you think." I was preserving compartments. I was also tired of being explained to like a child every time I didn't answer a question with the words you wanted. Her mouth opened and shut, the soundless fish of shame. She nodded once, a small bow to something she didn't want to name. "I'm sorry," she said. She looked at Liam. "I'm sorry to you, too." He considered her. "You made my mom sad," he said, "not cruel, just factual." "I know," she whispered. We left it there. A thing doesn't stop being true because it has been apologized for. Sometimes it only becomes more exactly itself. General Lang was waiting by the doors with the watchful ease of a man who lets time come to him. "Counselor," he said, a respectful nod that pretended the uniform was a suit and the courtroom was a conference room. "Well navigated." "Thank you for coming," I said. "Gratitude between people like us must be small and real. Large gratitude calls attention. Real is safe." "I trust your judgment," he said. "That's why I asked you to take on the last 3 programs. I trust it here, too." He looked at Liam. "You must be Liam. Your mother is very good at complicated jobs." Liam squinted appraisingly. "Are you a general?" "Yes." "Do you fly jets?" "No," he said. "But I make sure the people who do have what they need." "That's a good job," Liam decided. "I think so," the general said gravely. They shook hands like diplomats who had invented the tradition for this exact moment. Then the general stepped back into his own weather and was gone. After court, Ethan texted me one line, "I'll start the classes." No excuses. No bravado. Just surrender, thin enough to look like responsibility, but too late to matter. I didn't reply. Some conversations have to be conducted on paper you sign in a room with a stopwatch. For a week, the apartment felt brighter and no less small. The kitchen, with its stubborn cabinet door and the window that pretended at a view of the mountains if you leaned left, became a place where Liam and I relearned the rituals we had made and let sag. We played dueling playlists while chopping vegetables. We instituted quiet together after dinner, when we each read our own book in the same room. He told me, shy and urgent, that he wanted to see real planes. 2 Saturdays later, we drove north in the hour that couldn't decide between night and morning. At the academy overlook, the chapel's spires caught the early light like a hand catching a ball. We watched cadets in formation, dots moving with intention across a field. Liam stood so straight a small part of me ached. We went to the Air Museum and walked under wings that had known wars I had only read. A docent explained airflow with a paper strip that rose when he blew across it. Liam tried with the seriousness of science and the silliness of boys. He folded a paper airplane from the museum map and launched it from the mezzanine. It curved, wobbled, found a line in the air, and sailed farther than either of us expected. Back home, we set up a chart on the fridge: homework, chores, piano practice. He negotiated for sticky stars in exchange for extra minutes before bed on Fridays. I negotiated for the right to veto slime in the living room. We both got what we wanted most of the time. Systems work when everyone believes in them enough to forgive the days they don't. Chloe texted 3 times over the next month. The first was a long paragraph whose core message was I thought I was protecting Liam. The second was a photograph of our mother on a park bench feeding birds and looking like Memory wearing a human suit. The third was a sentence: I'm trying to be less sure I'm right about everything. I wrote back once, that would be new. It was not kind, but it was true. Sometimes truth is a scaffolding you put around a relationship so it can be rebuilt without collapsing on your head. Ethan finished his classes. Supervision ended. The first unsupervised weekend exchange was awkward and ordinary, as most firsts are. Liam returned with a story about a science experiment gone wrong that ended with a kitchen the color of despair and a pizza delivered by a man with a tattoo of a dragon reading a book. Progress is often exactly that: boring. We arranged pickup times with the brittle politeness of diplomats at the edge of a cold peace. At work, life did the thing it does: it filled. A project that had been stuck in interagency quicksand finally moved. A briefing slid onto my calendar with a title that made 3 people roll their eyes and 4 others check the room for bugs. I sat in a windowless conference room arguing commas with a colonel who believed punctuation was a tool of cowards and lawyers. I came home to a child who had made a fort out of dining chairs and a blanket and demanded a password before I could enter. I guessed wrong twice and received a lecture on OPSEC from a 9-year-old who had been listening more closely than I realized. On a Tuesday night, I found a letter from my mother in the mailbox in her looping, schoolteacher hand. The envelope smelled faintly of her perfume, the kind that had lived on every sweater she owned when I was small. It was 4 pages, most of them apology, some of them history, a little of it a wish that time could be politely asked to step backward. I read it twice at the kitchen counter, then slid it into the drawer where we kept tape and spare batteries and recipes I would never cook. The next day, I sent her a photograph of Liam launching a paper airplane, his face lit with the exact expression I get when a problem finally clicks. We started there. One night, after Liam fell asleep during a documentary about the solar system halfway through an explanation of why Jupiter is a bully, I stood at the window and watched Denver reassemble itself. Lights flickered on in high rises, then off, like a heartbeat. My reflection looked like a woman I might have asked for directions once. I put my palm against the glass. Cool. Solid. Between me and the street, 1,000 private lives were being lived. The single bright gift of pain is that it makes you deliberate. I had been living as if secrecy and shame were cousins. They aren't. Secrecy is a profession. Shame is a cage. I could keep one and return the other to the place in me that collected things I no longer needed. When people say I stopped hiding, they often mean they started telling everyone everything. That isn't what I did. I stopped hiding from my own measure of myself. I stopped apologizing for the parts of my life that do not photograph well, the unread bedtime stories because a red phone rang, the bribes of ice cream on a Tuesday because the day took more than it gave, the therapy appointment at 4 p.m. where I learned to name the tightness in my chest so it wouldn't name me first. I started telling Liam, not what I do, but who I am. He doesn't need the minutes of meetings. He needs the architecture of me. Months passed. The court date receded into the category of family stories that are no longer in the present tense but still oxygenate the room when they're told. On his 10th birthday, Liam asked if we could go back to the Air Museum. He wore a paper general's star he had cut out and taped to a baseball cap. The docent remembered him. The paper airplane kid, he said, like a title. They folded a new model together, a sleek dart that flew straighter. We brought it home. It lived on the mantel for a week and then became a casualty of a spontaneous living room soccer match. That was exactly the right ending. Sometimes, when the apartment is quiet and the only sound is the kitchen clock doing the simple math of time, I take the custody order out of the file and read it the way a person touches their wrist scar and remembers who fixed them. The paper is ordinary. The words are not poetry. But they describe a boundary drawn with care, and that is a kind of music. People ask, carefully, with the politeness Colorado favors, how I got through it. I want to tell them that I didn't get through it, I moved through it while it moved through me, and we made room for each other the way weather systems do. What I say is this: I told the truth I could tell, and I did not let the truth I couldn't tell be mistaken for a lie. That usually satisfies. On a recent Sunday, Liam and I sat on the floor making a fleet of airplanes, darts, gliders, something he called a stunt bird that refused to obey any law but joy. He lined them up on the rug like runways. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," I said. He launched the first one. It nosedived, skidded, and came to rest against the leg of the coffee table. He shrugged, adjusted the folds, launched again. This time it caught the room and flew. There are courtrooms to which I will never return. There are rooms I will always be ready to enter. There are jobs that will never be understood by people who need their understanding to be public and complete. There is a boy who knows how to make paper fly. There is a woman who learned the difference between being quiet and being erased, and who chose the former when the latter was demanded of her. The lesson was not that I should never have kept secrets. The lesson was that I should never have let anyone mistake my silence for weakness. That mistake was theirs, and my revenge was letting the truth destroy them in the place they thought I'd lose. What do you think? Was Olivia's victory enough justice, or would you have handled it another way? Tell me in the comments below, I'd love to hear your take. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss more tales where betrayal is exposed, truth triumphs, and revenge is served colder than ever.